Hey, Brandon Krisztal, in for Nate Jackson, I suppose. Nate's been providing recaps following the OTA practices that the media was allowed to view, and then day one of OTAs. Well, day two of OTAs has come and gone, and not only did Sean Payton cut practice off by about an hour, ending early, he decided to skip Thursday's practice altogether. Mandatory minicamp is done. He said the guys had not only kind of gotten ahead of schedule. They'd worked really hard. He was happy with where they were, and that if they would have asked or, still required, they would have been here tomorrow and then put, as he put it, their keys in the ignition or gotten on an airplane tomorrow. Instead, if they want to, they could leave after Wednesday's practice. There will be a home run derby at Coors Field Wednesday night that Guerilla Sports will have coverage of as well, and that's always a fun event. Cortland Sutton kind of spearheads that. He and in the past, Josie Jewell, Brandon McManus have hit plenty of home runs. My favorite was Andy Janovich a couple years ago. Hadn't swung a baseball bat since sixth grade, and he hit 6 out of Coors Field over the big fence. They put a little fake fence about 250 feet, maybe a little shorter, in the outfield, and they have targets and all this. But before we worry about home run derby, let's look at what the Broncos did in their second minicamp practice, and again, their final practice of the offseason. They will now be back at the end of July. So Sean Payton, as I mentioned, is happy with where the team is. As far as who participated, still no. Tight end Greg Dulcich. Veteran pass rusher John Franklin Myers, whom the team acquired during the draft on the final day of draft weekend from the Jets, maybe one of the best players in the league to not make a Pro Bowl. He sat out. He was around. He just didn't participate. Josh Reynolds was excused, and then Cortland Sutton participated for the second straight day in individual drills, and then was seen running the hill and then just talking to his teammates. But Sean Payton let us know that he and Cortland spent a long time talking together Wednesday morning in Sean's office, and that the conversations were good. Cortland wants to be there. He's saying the right types of things. We know he wants to be here. He said as much. He said it on the podium after practice Tuesday that he not only wants to be here, he wants to win a Super Bowl, and he hopes to get in the Ring of Fame. That was something he tweeted when the Ring of Fame announcement for Riley Odoms and for Steve Foley came out just a couple of weeks ago. So we know that the conversation, until it's not, will always be about the quarterback, or in this case, the quarterback. So in addition to Sean Payton talking, you had a couple of assistants and Jim Leonard and Davis Webb. We'll get to them, but you had all three coordinators: offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi, special teams coordinator Ben Katwika, and of course defensive coordinator Vance Joseph. They all met the media. No players talked, but we will get to catch up with a few of them, as I alluded to, at the home run derby. Nonetheless, they all were positive about where the team was. Certainly the defense and their continuity. We heard Alex Singleton talk about how much faster the team was playing. I think Nate might have referenced that in his Tuesday practice recap, but that everything is just more instinctive and comfortable because they're not having to learn things. They already know them, and they can just build on that. And when you have that continuity with your staff, it makes things so much easier in terms of not only recall, but then just layering in what you need to add to it. But you look at the quarterbacks, Joe Lombardi said it's maybe one of the deepest rooms they've had. And Joe Lombardi and now Pete Carmichael coming over as an offensive assistant, and obviously Sean Payton were together for so long in New Orleans. Drew Brees at the top had different backups. We know Chase Daniel was there for a while, and then towards the end of that run, guys like Teddy Bridgewater and Jameis Winston, who actually got on the field when Drew was banged up. But there was such a gap between Drew and his backups, and that's often the case when you have a Hall of Famer. Well, you certainly don't have a Hall of Famer yet. You have three young guys that all kind of do different things, but Lombardi, just like Sean Payton, is really happy with where Bo Nix is, says he's gotten to know his personality a little bit more and that there's some sarcasm. But the number we kept hearing Sean Payton talk about was the 61 starts in college. Well, Joe mentioned that as well, saying that you definitely could see the maturity and the veteran feel of those 61 starts. He also likes where the running back room is. And so the offense is clearly going to be ahead of where it was going into the training camp a year ago, not just because you have different quarterbacks than Russell Wilson and different skill set, but they're able to build on what they did a year ago and add to it, even if both Zach Wilson and obviously Bo Nix are new to this offense. All the players around them are certainly going to be more comfortable. As far as what we saw in practice, nobody lit the world on fire. Again, when you cut a practice off by an hour, you don't do too many team periods. You're not going to see much. Did see a nice slant from Jarrett Stidham to Troy Franklin, the rookie out of Oregon, the wide receiver from the fourth round that found the end zone. Saw some good pass rush, and that I think affected some of the timing. And so the offense Bo Nix at one point threw what would have been a touchdown pass to Brandon Johnson. I think Jaquan McMillan got in, took credit for breaking it up. I'm not sure if he did or not, but nonetheless, the defense happy with where they were in that red zone period. And you're not going to get much out of 7-on-7. Did see Lucas Kroll on a pass from Stidham make a play down the field. Zach Wilson still feels like this trip to quarterback rehab, even though Sean Payton didn't want to call it that, is still ongoing. Zach Wilson is not fixed yet. So it's going to be fascinating to see how training camp goes. No questions, though, after it was covered so much Tuesday to Sean Payton about the timeline of the quarterbacks. Vance Joseph happy with where his defense is, happy with where you've seen the pieces from the veteran free agents that they've added, namely JFM at the top of the list, but Brandon Jones on the back end, now working with PJ Locke. You go from having safeties that have played a lot of football, been there a lot, in Justin Simmons and obviously Kareem Jackson, to younger guys. PJ Locke played a fair amount last year, but hasn't played a lot of NFL football. Brandon Jones has played. He's played a lot for the Dolphins, but he's been overshadowed by so many other members of their secondary that I think a fresh start here will be good for him. And then you want to know who the starting cornerback is going to be opposite of Pat Surtain Jr. It feels like McMillan's got that locked down in the slot. So will it be Riley Moss? Will it be Damari Mathis? Will it be one of these vets that they have brought in? We will see that play out in camp, but you have a number of options, and so VJ's excited about that, as is Jim Leonard, who comes over after playing a long time in the NFL and then coaching in college the last 7 or 8 years. It was the first time we had talked to Jim since he was here in 2012, and Jim came in not just because he was a good safety right after Sean Payton and the Saints cut him, but also to make sure, because Trindon Holiday didn't always hold on to the football, and I say it was either 2012, 2013, but Jim Leonard was brought in to catch the football and hand it to Peyton Manning. Jim Leonard was a Big Ten's all-time leader in punt return yards. He had over 100 punt returns in the NFL. And so that's one area that when I asked the special teams coordinator, Ben Katwika, will he help there? How will he help? He said he's an invaluable resource because he has not only played so much football on the field, but he can help those returners because he was an elite catcher. Even in a windstorm, he was an elite catcher of the football. But it's cool to have Jim Leonard back. And I mentioned Davis Webb. He's a guy whose name you're going to hear talked about as a future head coach, just like Jim Leonard, who had a chance to interview for that Wisconsin job when it came open at his alma mater after being the defensive coordinator there, but they, of course, passed on him. And so then he ended up having hip surgery, consulting for Illinois. He was talked to by Sean Payton and the Broncos a year ago, but wanted to take the year off. Did some consulting work, as I mentioned, for Illinois, but he said he couldn't turn down a chance to get to the NFL the second time around. And so it's fun to see a guy that played for the Broncos now back coaching. But both Leonard, Webb, Vance Joseph, and there's probably a couple more guys on this staff that are being viewed at as future head coaches, and that's always fun to see. Sean Payton brought up the story about when they were in New Orleans the first couple of years, that Tom Benson, the late owner, would say, hey, Sean, we sure have a lot of teams talking to our coaches about other opportunities and head coaching jobs. And he said, hey, Mr. B, when they're not talking to our guys, that's where you know something is wrong. So they're happy with where the staff is. They have that continuity, and that's allowed them to build on that. The one other thing from practice, kind of the biggest takeaway, and Sean talked about it a lot, the other BK, Coach BK, Ben Katwika, talked about the new kickoff rule and the emphasis to try to figure out how you're going to handle the return. And again, if you're not familiar with it, kickoff is now moved where the kicker is on the other side of the 50, but the kick coverage team is at the 35, I want to say, or the 40, whatever it is. They're on this side of the 50, 10 yards away from the return team. And when the ball is caught, then they can run, or when it hits the ground. And so watching the kickers work through different types of kicks is going to be fascinating here and everywhere else in terms of the rotation of the ball and where you're trying to place it. New rule, if it hits inside the 20, ends up in the end zone, and isn't returned, if it's down by the return team, obviously if it was down by the kicking team, it would be a touchdown. It's returned to the 20 versus the 30, I believe. Sean Payton was even confused on that. So that's going to be fascinating. Can they get a kick to hit the ground, miss the two returners? They expect two returners. And then can that go down to the 20? Because that would be ideal. It hits in the box, as they call it, and then into the end zone. So you will see that worked on throughout training camps across the NFL. May not see too much of it during the preseason because teams aren't going to want to, I don't say tip their hand, but just try something. And if it works, then show other teams, oh, this is what you should be doing. They want to wait and, I guess, have those successes in the regular season. We know failure will come with it as well. But Sean talked about it again today, that there will be more emphasis on special teams in the special teams blocks of practice on the return and the kickoff themselves more so than ever. And so that maybe means a little less in terms of punt return, or they have to restructure how they do practice and spend a little more time, add another period here just to work on kickoff coverage and kick return because of this one-year trial of this new rule. And so then the final thing is summer break, right? Sean Payton said he wants the players to get away. They all have their own weight program, but he wants them to take their mind off football as much as they can. If they're going to work out, great. Just like Cortland Sutton mentioned, all three quarterbacks and the pass catchers and maybe some of the running backs who certainly are pass catchers are going to get together after, I believe, the July 4th holiday. And then they'll have a couple weeks and hit the ground running. But Sean wants both his coaches and his players to just take some time away from football and enjoy their summer break, even though it's only 5 weeks long. So we will continue to talk about Broncos, both Nate and I here at Guerilla Sports, and have you covered wall to wall with all the things the Broncos are doing in the offseason around town and nearby. So make sure you stay locked into all of Guerilla's channels. But there is your final day of mandatory minicamp training report for Guerilla Sports.